and it goes with 1968. Bouhanna, in the 1960s, the first artist to have this crazy idea of using a computer. Back then, when, for example, Bouhanna in 68, she goes to one of these research center to use a computer. She was the first person. There were only like 2 or 3 accessible computers in France like that. And she managed to get there and ask the director of the center if she could use the computer. He asked why, and she said just to make art, and he laughed at her. Said, no, there is like really serious people using this computer, so mathematician, researcher, etc. It's not just to make art, but she insisted so much, and actually it was in 68 when there were some very important protests in France, and so this university was empty back then, and so she let her actually, he let her play for a month with this computer, and she created the first generative artworks with the use of computers, and the first then translated into a pen plotter. And that could be seen also as a beginning in using computer-based systems in order to make works which can be called also generative art. But then, of course, there is many other events. I have to go very quick because actually it can be very long, but in 2010, you have to be like Casey Reyes, that is like instrumental in democratizing actually generative art and the programs that visual artists will have to use in order to create their own generative artworks, where you create processing. I think there is like about 500 users, like let's say like on the year 1 and 16 talents user after 1 year. And that 16 talents actually people who are interested in making art and would discover actually a very innovative tool in the new medium to make art. And that I think is the very beginning of this of today's generation of generative artists we see today that are flourishing thanks to other also like many platforms like Artblock, etc. But that really started a bit like using this early program that I think Casey Reyes gave access to in the early 10s years. And then of course there is to me a big milestone with Artblocks because he adds like another conceptual idea around the distribution of the works, and he connects actually the fact there is the generative artwork that's created with the use of the code, the script. But then there is this conceptual aspect where the users or the collector that actually purchase or does claim the work with an active participant of the work. And if he clicks at a certain period of time, it will generate one work. Maybe if he lets, if he does another seat, it will be a different artwork. That's why it goes back to Pollock, where every time he would have to make a certain work, it would be different. And that's quite interesting. And that also obviously it allows basically to connect very easily, very efficiently all the collectors to the artist or the.
That's an expert voice. That's an expert voice. Amazing. And James, I'm curious, like your perspective too. Like, when did you start this processing? Like, kind of in terms of jumping into generative art. Do you have a background and understanding of art history, or were you more coming at it purely to mathematics? Like, what was the inspiration behind a project like Worry?
Yeah, so to answer your first question, I did start with processing and moved on to P5.js, which was important because then I could take my code and deploy it onto the blockchain or running a browser. And one of the really fascinating things about generative art is you can see the live result of the algorithm on your phone, or your computer, or a screen, or the side of a building, or a postage stamp. It really doesn't matter because generative art is typically infinitely scalable. And there's infinite numbers of possibilities that each algorithm folds. So to me, those were the two things that just became really fascinating, that infiniteness of the art form. And for me, my background was always in digital art, and I always was professionally a programmer, but I never connected the dots until I really learned about processing. So I really have to give it up to Casey Reyes and Ben Fry and all the contributors of Processing Foundation, because it allows people who maybe are really technically gifted and they don't know that they can be creative to have a creative outlet. And it's really an amazing piece of software. It's all free, and you can try to use it. And that's really where I got started.
amazing. And, just to expand the conversation a little bit, I'm curious, how traditional art collectors responded to generative work in digital art, and maybe we can have the interview Audrey and Madeleine as well. The Color Foundation, for example, when you guys brought that to life, and with the MoMA and the Rivers work, I'm very curious what your perception is from the traditional side, and what do you think that's going to look like the next year or two onward?
But that's guidance. I can start. So I think it's been a really amazing journey in the last 3 years. I would say if we're looking into the next 3 years, I think there's still a lot of context that needs to be provided into what's happening in this space. I think one thing that the Rafiq work did, which was really amazing, was people say that it's a crowd pleaser. Jerry Salt says it's a lava lamp. But it really engaged people in digital art, and I've never seen so many people from so many different walks just sit and enjoy a piece of artwork together. I've really never seen that kind of cohesive communal feeling around a piece of art. So I think one thing that Rafiq really did was open up the doors a little bit and provide sort of an entry point for the general public to start understanding and engaging with art created with technology. So I think that's been really amazing. All of that being said, blockchain is confusing to people. And I think that right now we don't really have accessible resources. We don't really have educational tools that can meet people where they are in terms of understanding and context. So I think looking into the next few years, something that I'm really passionate about is trying to support people in learning about blockchain and NFTs. And I think that will add to the dialogue that currently exists here by bringing new voices into the conversation. I think the same goes for, it's interesting because you think about a collector, there's probably a different answer from a for-profit auction house versus a museum, but in thinking about traditional collectors, definitely the context is key. I guess I would say, on my last point, art is a really human thing, and people go to museums, to experience the human experience together. They go because they want to share enjoying art together. And so collectors, in the same way, there's a collector base that builds around specific art movements because people enjoy sharing that human experience around that art together. And I think being able to, with art and tech, people who come from the traditional art space maybe don't necessarily see the human element in digital art sometimes, and so it feels harder to connect to that art because they don't see the human element. In reality, art created with technology is a very human thing. Humans build technology. We're all sitting up here, we engage with it. Most of you out here are engaging with it. So being able to really make that connection for people and start to open up the conversation and create more accessibility around that dialogue, I think is important looking into the next many years. It's hard to follow up on that. That was so eloquent. I think for me, what is missing for a lot of traditional collectors is how they experience visual art. In a similar way to if you were getting introduced to, let's say, a Picasso artwork and it's shown to you on a small board screen, it probably doesn't look that attractive if you don't know about the context, the story of the artist, his other artworks, and the times that the art was made. And I think in a similar way, when digital art has been confused with PFP type NFTs, a lot of traditional collectors that we come into contact with, when they first hear about NFTs or digital art, and instantly ban, that's not for me. I don't like screens. I like paintings on my wall and nothing else. Having said that, I do think with institutions like Sotheby's, institutions like MoMA, there is a lot of change that is happening because there's a lot of work being done to place an artwork within an historical context. Generative art didn't come from nowhere. It's been it's been a card movement that's been going on for decades. And this, even though this is the first time you're learning about it and you're looking at a piece of art for you, you should also know about its background. At the same time, I also think that education needs to happen twice. I think our space moves very quickly. We have a lot of new language that is very foreign to the traditional art world, even minting. And I think we tend to use language that becomes so familiar with us in explaining concepts to people that are not within this crowd, that are not in the know, that it becomes harder for people to feel like this is an accessible space that they can come into. So for us, in working with Calder and a lot of the bridging work that we do, I think we're often thinking about language, how we show up and where we show up to the best of our ability to make sure that our larger community is able to come around the work.
And kind of referencing what you said, like MoMA, for example, is one of the most well-regarded art institutions in the world. And so what you guys kind of, all of this is so new and experimental. Like when you zoom out, what goes into making those curatorial decisions? And same for you, choosing which estates you're going to work with or which artists. I'm curious, what's the decision making behind that?
Yeah, so I was actually just talking about this morning. The founding director of the museum, there's this quote that's I think is amazing. He wanted the museum to be a laboratory, and in it, the audience would be experimenting with the people at the museum and the artists. So this idea of really an exchange of ideas and an exchange of value. And to that end, the museum from the beginning, like since its founding, has really been interested in and passionate about exploring new ideas, about exploring art that is truly at the cutting edge of culture. Our mission statement is connecting people around the world to the art of our time. To me, from my personal perspective, blockchain-based artworks could not be more the art of our time, because it's truly a new idea, it's a new technology, and there's new kinds of art that are being created, is being used not only as an infrastructure, but also as a medium. What's more new and exciting and revolutionary than that? So the museum engaging with blockchain actually feels quite natural because it's in line with the values of the institution since its founding. To answer your question about curatorial decisions, I think it's tough because ideas, getting a little esoteric here, but ideas don't come out of nothing. Sort of to your point, Audrey, every idea has a history, and so it's sort of a natural organic process of the museum experimenting with blockchain, trying to explore blockchain across the institution's verticals, and then kind of just iterating and moving from there. I mean, we don't really have a set plan for what the museum's engagement with blockchain will look like in a few years, but we're trying to be really, really super intentional about what we do. And I think, especially in the blockchain space, what's really important when you think about curation is really keeping a pulse on the ecosystem, because like you said, blockchain, Web3 moves so quickly, and there are so many new ideas and really interesting dialogue. So just making sure that we're in touch with the people that are creating here really informs curatorial decisions. I think for us, we've been fortunate to work with curators. So for example, for our most recent exhibition with 6M5, we worked with Audrey Ou, who used to be at the Guggenheim, but just became the artistic director at Rockpoint Art Museum. But when I'm thinking about traditional artists or established artists that have not historically been in the digital space entering in, I think we are only interested in estates and artists that want to do something that otherwise cannot be done. So for Calder, for example, I think if you were to take photos of its sculptures and put it onto the blockchain, I think that's pretty stupid and not interesting. In fact, when we had first talked to the Calder Foundation, they were very against NFTs. The exact response that we got when we asked about NFTs from Sandy was become a dear friend. The grandson of Calder and their current president does NFTs no effing time. And so for us, it's not about an attitude thing. We have a lot of partners that we're talking to now that we worked with, initially when they talk to us, they don't see how they can play a role in this world. But I think it's really important for us to show, with Sandy, for example, we've worked with, Calder worked with Roll Marks. When you look at the artwork, it's not meant to be a replica of a Calder experience or artwork in person. It's very much so a new collaboration with a digital artist at this time. And I think that for us, I think maybe it's less about aesthetics or less about an attitude, but more about who is willing to experiment to do what is not possible within the physical world that we've lived in, that is now available by blockchain. And that's what makes the partners interesting.
And James, I'm curious, now that institutions are starting to involved, and at Sotheby's we have exhibitions, how do you envision your work to be exhibited?
It's tricky. I did a project this summer where there were 4,700 individual outputs, and that would take up a lot of space. So there's challenges, I think, to telling the full story in any real long-form generative art project, just due to space constraints, right? Like, that's why it's naturally digital. So I think that there's an element of, for me at least, question around, does everything need to be curated? Does it always need to be long form? Are there ways to kind of pick and choose aspects of the full story of an algorithm to show and narrow it down? And how do you do that? I think that's really challenging because, for me at least, my artwork, I want as much diversity across the book collection as possible. So I want every single piece to be unique in one way or another. So I would want them all to be on the wall. But to really identify the unique kind of outliers, maybe ones that have emergent properties, I think that's where I would hone in on. So that would be probably my first take on it. And I do think that there's a way to represent things digitally and then do physical representations off screen. And that goes back to plotter art. So one of the things that I did with Audrey is it's natively digital, but I basically wrote a secondary rendering algorithm so that I could put it to paper. So you could get it as a drawing as well. And that to me felt like a good pairing so that I could deliver a product that people could absorb and appreciate in different ways.
Can you explain what a secondary rendering, with
Secondary rendering pipeline?
Okay.
Yeah, so a lot of generative art, the end result is pixels. Pixels on your screen, pixels that you might send to a printer to have a print made. But, I wanted to get beyond that. So I kind of took out that aspect of the algorithm and instead gave it a new job. And the job was to send information to my pen plotter. So instead of pixels, it would basically take a pen and draw everything with ink. Now that definitely has some challenges because typically you can only use a couple colors. So you get to, again, as the artist, kind of take a step back, think about it in a different way, minimize it, and then create almost a different artwork from the same root. So if you look at a digital version and a pen plotted version, you'll immediately notice that they're similar, but they're not exactly the same.
And Michael, how do you think, from your experiences, the work should be exhibited? What's been the challenge for you in terms of demonstrating the power, I guess, of generative and digital art to traditional collectors?
Well, no, I think that's maybe the most challenging part for us because we are an auction house, and when we sell a work, our responsibility towards the artist or the seller is really to print the way we present it, the frame we put around the world, we put text, etc. And it's true that I don't think screens, it depends, there can be some setup that works very well for certain works with the right or materials, etc. But I don't think most of the time the screens really enhance and pay tributes to the works, especially when, and we talked about the traditional collectors a little bit, but for the traditional collectors there is a high standard because they also connect some great painters for which they are very sensitive to the canvas, the texture, the composition, and to the physical presence of the works. And when they purchase a work, they imagine the work for those who display the work at that place, for example, they really envision themselves how it will look like in their interior. And with the TV, I like most of the time with traditional collector, I have a lot of difficulties to convert it into a scene where they want to see this object into their place, which I understand. It's that it doesn't have the same aura of a painting or a work on paper. So, for example, we've done some shows where we printed in museum quality prints, frames. We have some limitation to it because then we can do only still images. But sometimes it works very well when it's in line with the artist, etc. And but just to go back also about the traditional collectors, because I think it's a super interesting topic and something that comes in the discussions very often. But me, I don't really see the traditional collectors as being really a goal for us and to be onboarded into this new form of art. Just like if we were to compare some collectors, the older generation, 80 years old, who are very passionate about old master works, 15th, 16th, 7th century. Today they would walk past our galleries and see a Warhol and still not have zero interest for it because they don't see that as real art. It's too easy. It's a serigraphy of an image taken from a newspaper by Warhol. There is not enough the hand of the artist, the technique like we would see in the Renaissance work. And so, and the ones is like trying from the pop art movement, trying to get them into loving this as if it was really needed to have them in. But what I see from traditional collectors, and I think it's also when like MoMA we see have a big impact, is like Graphic Canada, we had the work for 2 weeks displayed in our galleries, and this is the work for which we had the highest number of demands from traditional collectors because they recognize the name, they know about the MoMA acquisition, it brings some trust, and then they are curious about it. So there is some institutions when they start to really endorsing somehow some artists, it helps also people into taking some more risk and venture into some new technology, new form of art, etc. But yeah, I just wanted to say that about virtual victims.
And to add, I think the question of physical and digital is really interesting. People may differ on this perspective, but it kind of drives me crazy when a work, I won't go there, I think that there's a beauty in natively digital works. Like part of the interest in the work is that it's natively digital. So to just take a natively digital work that you produced and then print it, to me, I think it's really important to ask the question, why? Like what value does that actually add? How does that actually add richness? And I think, James, like with the work that you're describing, what you're doing is actually creating like another element, a layer on top by using both the physical and the digital. I think that's very different than sort of purchasing an NFT and then wanting to print it or print up on your wall. I think not in all contexts, but in some contexts, you actually lose some of the beauty of the work because it was natively digital for a reason.
Oh, no, sorry. And this is where I think what you've done with 6 and 5 was amazing because actually we see that a great way actually to display it, to display them, is to have very immersive experience, the use of digital lights, the use of the space, etc. And that's for some digital artists actually the right way for the viewers to really experience their art because the screen makes some lights and it changes the space and so on.
Thank you, Abel. I was just thinking about what JG said and us working in 6 and 5 this time. I think what was so magical is what the exhibition that we put up, it's 6 and 5's dreams. He went into the space and he saw possibilities and he was able, for the first time, to bring his creative freedom that he has in a digital now into the physical. And I think that opportunity needs to be given more to artists to be a part of how their work is presented. Because you know more about the background of your works what you described with the subtle differences than anyone else. And so for us, it was just one of the craziest things. And I honestly had a very hard time envisioning this before I visited the space. But SA6 and 5 had an idea that he wanted the middle of the space to be slightly elevated off of the ground, and for there to be a huge screen basically on the ground that would be covered up by the edges so it looks like a circular screen. And then he wanted there to be a mirrored reflective surface above. And the whole idea was, instead of someone looking at the LED screen directly, he wanted people to look above to the reflection. And I think these are ideas that only artists can come up with, or artists working in conjunction with curators. So I think it's wonderful that institutions like Sotheby and MoMA are thinking actively about how to show piece art in the right way. I actually also really loved what you did with Merrill art, because I think it was a really interesting thing to show people that, hey, these are outputs of the algorithm and not necessarily the final artworks. So I think with more exhibitions and more creative opportunities like these, get it to people who do truly believe in digital art and understand the field, more and more people will then come to see it and embrace it and think of it as art.
Amazing. And, year is turning 100, right? When's her birthday? It's coming up. So that was a really fun contact. But yeah, so I guess we can wrap this up. But I'm curious, from came back from Shanghai, said the energy was just incredible. And I'm curious, each one of you, what you think the future holds for digital art and generative art and, the space that we're building.
I guess how it occurs. I came out with Shanghai so excited. And, Trlab, we're a small startup. We put on this exhibition with really 3 team members. And just seeing the reception, and to give context, in China, if people are lining up, it's usually for food or shopping, never for art. And we had people lining up for 2 to 3 hours on the weekend in the cold to try to get into the exhibition. We had around 1.5 million mentions on Xiaohongshu Little Red Book, which is the kind of I like to describe it as an Instagram Pinterest crossover that people use to discover cultural activities to do on the weekend. And I think part of that is because we gave 6 and 5 creative freedom. We didn't say, hey, we're gonna have one screen here and you can decide what artwork you want to put on the screen. We took him to a completely raw space and say, do whatever you want with it. And I think with more opportunities like was given to for artists, and with more people being excited and after experiencing digital art for the first time in an interactive, immersive way, I am so excited for the future of digital art. I think we're really early on. There's a lot of work to be done, but the energy, I feel, is very culpable, especially when I went back to China this time around. And how about you, James?
Yeah, I think we've kind of experienced this first wave of long-form generative art, and where that starts is one call to a random number generator, right? That's how every algorithm kind of derives its uniqueness. And what I'm really excited about is starting to question those assumptions of how to build generative algorithms, because random's one thing, but what if we start using data from other sources and powering these algorithms through that? Could that be interactive? Could the audience participate? Artists are starting to explore some of these concepts, and I am very excited about that because I think we're going to see a new level of immersion with generative art where it starts to blur the lines between who's actually making the art. Is it just the artist? Is it just random? Is it just the participants? And where could we go with that? I think that does tie into physical installations as well. Again, just to provide another level to the connection between folks and the narrative and the artist.
Yeah, and I think that artists are always the first innovators, and it's really the artists in this space who are pushing the boundaries and breaking new ground. And honestly, it's an honor to spend time in this space chatting with artists, going to exhibitions, just engaging with the artist community, because they're truly the most brilliant, like as a group of people, the most brilliant, creative, and excited people I've ever had the honor of knowing. So I think ultimately the future of digital art will be led by the artists engaging in this space, and we as institutions, just our job is to do the best we can to support and to provide as much opportunity as possible. And I think it's also important that we listen. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Michael?
I think I agree, and I think it's super exciting to be like in this very nascent space, in the very nascent movement. And for Sotheby, like we are 300 years old company, and historically, and since 300 years old, we've been doing secondary market. And for the first time in this digital art space, we actually start working directly with the artists. And we are very excited actually to start and to increase these partnerships with the artists. It requires from us to rethink the business model, to see how we can better invest and put our resources into supporting into the production of the work, the guidance also sometimes for the artists to better release their work. And that's more a first to market type of gallery role we see into the traditional art space. And so that's extremely exciting for us to be able to really support the artists and to present them also to collectors.
Amazing. And does anyone have any final comments or? Yes, thank you all for coming today and participating and engaging with us. And
Thank you, guys.